The 20th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture is fast approaching. This year, it will be hosted at the Durban International Convention Centre, KwaZulu-Natal, and will be delivered by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honourable Mia Mottley, under the theme Social Bonding and Decolonization in the Context of Climate Crisis, Perspectives from the Global South. Now, for more on this, we are joined by the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Sello Hatang. Sello, great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Good morning.
Quite an exciting guest speaker that you have this year that's going to be delivering the lecture. Take us through the process of getting her, because I know she is a very, very busy and in-demand lady.
No, maybe I should draw a picture of what happened when we approached her to speak, Leanne. So we sent a request through from Prof. Ndebele, the chairman of the board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and a few weeks later we received this message that says, no, she's accepted. So we got the opportunity to then speak to the minister in the Prime Minister's office, and she said when the Prime Minister received the request, she said, whatever is there, drop it, because I'm doing this one. So that's I think, the pool that the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture has, but also the pool of the subject matter. So we are just as excited as she was when she received the request. And in fact, we then got the opportunity of seeing her in New York in September. And the excitement in the room, Leanne, was just unbelievable, because she said she has three heroes, which is Nelson Mandela, which includes Nelson Mandela. And I think with that in mind, she will deliver one of the best lectures we've had, we believe.
I must say, I'm really looking forward to this one, because she is certainly somebody that knows how to touch nerves, because she did that. And I think one of the first times, I mean, she's been around for a very, very long time, but I must say the one moment she stole that center stage was at COP26, when she was holding leaders to account and calling them faceless leaders, and went as far as quoting Bob Marley and saying, when are you going to stand up for what is right? You know, she really did. And all of this based on climate change. So this is clearly a massive passion of hers, particularly in the nation that she lives in. I mean, you know, just any sort of, I mean, when you're on an island nation and there's any water level rises or anything like that, it is complete devastation. I mean, they could be lost forever. But, you know, talk to us about the sort of message that she is bringing to this particular lecture.
And part of the message is ensuring that we are not going to continue as the global south, the third world, as it were, to be spoken about, where we are subject matters where we are discussed, but we are not part of the debates and the discussions. That's why it's about also ensuring that the global south now is on the table and part of the debates that are happening instead of being spoken about. The second part of it is beginning to ensure that we talk about decoloniality. What does it mean to be dealing with these issues of climate change in this time where we're talking about decolonization? And you'd remember that that's one person who actually took Barbados out of the Commonwealth and decided that they do not recognize the Queen as the head of state, as it were, honorary, as it were. And I think that's why the subject matter became also important. What does decolonization mean when you're talking about climate change? The climate change crisis, of course, is something that we're then saying, how do we build more solidarity as nations that are most vulnerable, such as Barbados and also South Africa itself, where parts of our nation could also just suffer as much as Barbados could suffer, as you described. Recently, we saw what happened in KZN. And we are saying if we are to begin to think of climate change that way, it means that we are no longer talking about climate change in the future. We're talking about climate change that's here, that we're faced with as it happened in Durban. And that's why the is just as importantly, and we decided that we should take it to KZN, to Durban specifically, for us to remind the people that this is something that happened as recent as last year. And I'm hoping that we will then begin to say to those who continue to suffer in the KZN of this world and around the world, that we're saying we are in solidarity with you, and we'll continue to do so until such time that global leaders listen to the message that Mia Mottley has to give, of saying each one of us carries responsibility for the world we want to see that can then be safer for those who are still to be born.
You've kind of gone and sort of answered almost the next question I was going to say. Is it a coincidence that this is being held in KZN at the Durban International Convention Centre? I don't think so, from this answer you've just given.
No, we were very intentional. In fact, at the time that we decided on the theme, we decided that we need to then be taking it to a place that was affected by climate change directly. And to have lost over 40 people in our country, to have lost so many homes, tell you that it should tell a story to all South Africans that if we do not carry that sense of solidarity around climate change issues, we are in trouble. I received a message from a friend of mine in Kenya, Shadrach Katu, who sent a message through to say Kenya at the moment is going through the hell of drought, one of the worst they've experienced. He was in Watate, where they do not have water. They've lost over 100 elephants, which died because of climate change. Now, if you are hearing those stories around the continent, it means that the Global South needs to be doing more. That's why the rebuilding of KZN is not just one project that should be close to our hearts as a nation, but should continue to inform all that we do, so that we then say, the future should be better, where we do not have that happen in KZN. That's why our partners, such as Colin Mashawana Foundation and Old Mutual Foundation, are always in that province to try rebuild that province. And I think if we are to do that, where we're trying to then undo, in part, what the global north continues to do, we will at least have a country that's better, and where we would then have KZN that's safer, Cape Town that's safer, where we do not have the kind of floods that we experienced recently.
Yeah, interesting you bring that up. I know we are hoping that we're able to get to Mozambique in the next week or so, where we'll actually be able to show as well the effects of climate change and how it exacerbates the issues that any country has facing or is facing. I mean, just, you know, in terms of taking poverty levels to absolute lows and destroying nations is something that we are seeing. It's happening. It is now. I mean, one of the very interesting points that the Prime Minister Mottley actually brought out, and we're seeing it as a living example of what is happening in KwaZulu-Natal and how she speaks about what climate change can do. And it's not just about the weather. I'm just going to quote again some of the things where she says, other things that matter to people on a day-to-day basis because of climate change is education, healthcare, roads, all become affected because you have a limited fiscal space to be able to do what you can. And I mean, just take a look at what's happening in KZN. Every single one of those things that I mentioned have been affected and are still affected due to the adverse effects that happened during the floods. And, you know, this is something we need to take very, very seriously. And I think that message will come through very strongly when this lecture is delivered.
Yeah, one of the things that we also have to be conscious about as citizens, and I'm glad that you quoted her as saying some of the things that directly affect you include roads, include how infrastructure can be damaged the way it was in KZN. And that small scale, in my view, of what could be coming if we're not doing more. And I want to remind the viewers of something that Madiba said way back in the 50s already, where he was looking at how we can also contribute towards a greater, cleaner environment. He was referring to, if you remember, Leanne, in Long Walk to Freedom, in fact, where he was driving between Johannesburg on his way to Knysna. And this is, again, Madiba, an activist who is a member of the ANC, but also a lawyer, etc. And as he was driving past in Bloemfontein, in the Free State rather, not Bloemfontein specifically, but in the Free State, he noted that the amount of plastic that was hanging around on the fences there. He said, I worry that this plastic and pollution in our nation will then at least not give my great-grandchildren or even my grandchildren an opportunity to see the rivers that I'm seeing now, the dams that I'm seeing. And we're seeing it where dams have gone dry, where you're beginning to see the country that you used to know that has so much water. The finite nature of some of the natural resources that we thought were always going to be there are now disappearing because of also what we do. Archbishop Tutu similarly was also worried about pollution. And if we are to at least contribute towards a cleaner environment by stopping pollution, by planting trees. That's why the Nelson Mandela Foundation with our partners on the 5th of December, we will be planting trees. We're working with the city of Johannesburg. We will be planting trees in a park here in Johannesburg. And we are hoping that those trees that we'll be planting will begin to at least deal with issues that can reverse some of the stuff that has happened around climate change. And it's those actions that we are saying to each citizen, stop throwing things out the window as you're driving through. That box of food that you then throw out, discard it that way, it's also adding to the problem. So you can't always just blaming the global north. We also have a sense of, we should have a sense of agency, that each of one of us has a role to play towards a cleaner environment.
Yeah, you speak about trees, and it's quite interesting. The Prime Minister, I know that is one of her big passions as she comes in, and I think she's overseen this strategy in Barbados to plant over 1 million trees or something, and it's done entirely by the population that have bought into it, and that's something that they want to do. Let's talk about the other aspect of this of the lecture, and it also deals with colonial extraction playing a part in all of this. I mean, you say that since the Industrial Revolution, while the Global South disproportionately faces climate disasters, much of the Global North has continued to pour greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and fortify its regions against climate disasters. And you see these little nations struggling and having to foot the bill for what is still happening. Let's talk about that.
You know, one of the issues that we have to face head on is how this extractive nature also doesn't help with social bonding. How can we be bonded as people? How can we be bonded with the environment? How can we be bonded as nation states when some care deeply about what's happening and others don't? They continue to, as you say, pollute. They continue to ensure that they live their lives large without caring at all on the impact of what they are doing on smaller nations such as South Africa. And I think until such time that we think of the colonial past as actually part of the colonial present, where the present is something that rather the past is not so much in the past, but it's today, happening today, where extraction of even just the minerals that we get here without rehabilitating places after extracting and continuing to build the global north at the expense of the global south, it's something that we should also reckon with. And that reckoning means that each one of us then must ask ourselves, what are we doing to hold them accountable? And one of the people that's good at holding people accountable is Mia Mottley. And we are hoping that South Africans will not be seeing this message as something that's out there, that they will then be holding accountable here, the capital here in South Africa, to say, you need to be aware of what you are doing here in South Africa in order for us to build a nation that at least is conscious of what needs to be done to rebuild ourselves and reimagine ourselves as a progressive nation that cares for the poor and the vulnerable. That decolonial narrative that we'll be also advocating for is the one that says we can't be reimagining that future without saying, how do we hold each other accountable today? And because those who are still to be born will suffer more if we do not hold each other accountable today. So the Durban ICC will be the place where those things will be discussed, and we're hoping that you'll join us because we've got this partnership with SABC where we're saying all of us must contribute towards the future we want to see.
All right, Sello, wonderful. I know the lecture happening on the 12th of this month, so that's next week, Saturday. If people can't get down there, it is going to be broadcast, as always, I hope?
It will be broadcast by SABC on 404 and also SABC 2 from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 5.
Wonderful. Sello, thank you. Thanks so much for talking to us, and really looking forward to this one. I think she's going to be a phenomenal speaker at this year's annual Nelson Mandela Lecture. I mean, quite frightening when you look at the amount of money that these small nations and developing countries have to spend on trying to get over this. I mean, just listen to this number. For developing countries, the cost of countering climate-related hazards like drought, flood and rising seas is at $70 billion a year. It's expected to rise up to $300 billion a year if this in fact doesn't stop in terms of what we are doing to the planet.